When Michael Gray received a brief message about two children who carried his missing wife's surname, his heart nearly stopped, and the moment he realized they could be his children, the silence was like a blow, leaving in the air the feeling that something momentous was about to be revealed. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Michael Gray was standing before a massive pulpit adorned with arrangements of white flowers and a sign in golden letters announcing the charity event. Despite his extensive experience in leading large businesses, Michael's heart pounded heavily in his chest. He wasn't there out of pure generosity. It felt like he was paying off a debt to his conscience. The foundation bearing his name funded various shelters for women in vulnerable situations, but many shareholders in his company considered it unnecessary. That night was meant to publicly celebrate Michael's efforts for social causes, though deep down he knew it was merely an attempt to soothe the guilt of a haunting past. In the first few minutes of his speech, he noticed that some people clapped unenthusiastically. Others didn't even bother to hide their restlessness, checking their watches and exchanging bored glances. Michael moistened his lips, pausing briefly before resuming the text he had rehearsed. He spoke about the importance of giving back to society, about how resources directed to social projects could change lives, especially for mothers fleeing abusive relationships with their young children. As he explained the effort it took to keep the shelters running, flashes of Hannah's face came to mind. It was as though with every sentence he saw her expressions from a distant time when nothing seemed impossible. For a moment he choked on his words, closing his eyes to contain the tightness in his chest. He had never come to terms with losing the only woman he had ever truly loved. Hannah had a free spirit, full of personal projects, but something in their life had suddenly shattered. To this day, he didn't know the details. The few memories he held onto were vivid, like her smile as she painted in their small makeshift studio at home, the silly laughter when they dreamed of traveling the world, her scent during an embrace on the morning of their wedding anniversary. Amid these recollections came torturous questions. When did everything fall apart? How could Hannah have disappeared so definitively, leaving behind only a few clothes and a cryptic note? The speech ended somewhat abruptly. Michael dropped the microphone as a sparse round of applause echoed through the hall. He descended the stage accompanied by his assistant, a diligent young woman who tried to ease any tension with compliments about how well he had spoken. But Michael, his forehead still damp with sweat, refused to relax. He needed to return backstage, where some company advisors had requested an urgent meeting. He could only imagine that bad news was coming, likely regarding the charity projects he was funding. Backstage, the atmosphere was tense. A large table filled with papers and laptops awaited Michael. 3 advisors observed him as he entered, their impatience evident. One, the eldest, wore thick-framed glasses and tapped his fingers on the tabletop. Another, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, had the cold glint of someone who only saw numbers. The third held a tablet, his eyes glued to the screen. "Michael, I'll be direct," said the eldest. "We're facing a cash flow issue in the company. We need to redirect resources. This charity initiative you're pushing, it's time to rethink the spending." He sighed heavily, displaying a folder with reports that apparently showed the company was overspending on the shelters. Michael placed his hands on his hips, struggling to keep calm. "So now we're just going to cut funding for people who have nowhere to go?" he protested. The man in the impeccable suit shrugged. "Philanthropy doesn't line the shareholders' pockets. You know that. It's nice to talk about social responsibility, but the priority is ensuring profit." Michael's stomach churned. Dealing with such cold-hearted individuals nearly made him lose his composure. Fortunately, his assistant whispered something in his ear, trying to distract him by mentioning an urgent phone call. He signaled for her to give him a moment. Turning back to the advisors, he picked up the folder of reports with a tense expression. "I'll review this carefully, but I don't think the issue is the social investments. Perhaps we should revisit other expenses." "Don't argue the obvious. retorted the eldest. "Adjust the accounts, or we'll take action ourselves." Michael snapped the folder shut, barely containing his anger. He managed a frosty smile before leaving the room. He was resolute. He wouldn't cave to the pressures that would sacrifice the shelters, even if it cost him the shareholders' approval. Before returning to the hall, his assistant hurried over. "Mr. Gray, sorry to insist, but this is a call you need to take personally. They said it's important." He nodded and, phone in hand, sought a quieter corner. As he headed to a side corridor, Hannah's image returned like a shadow. Every time he thought about giving up, he remembered that this social work might somehow honor the life they once shared. Stopping beside a heavy curtain, he leaned against the wall for stability and answered the call. "Hello? Who's speaking?" Silence. At first, all he could hear was breathing and faint noises, possibly from passing cars. Then, a deep, unfamiliar male voice broke the stillness. "Michael Gray?" "Yes, this is he. Who is this?" A few more seconds of hesitation on the other end. Then the voice continued, "I believe you want to find Hannah, don't you? I know things that might help." Michael's heart raced so fiercely that he gripped the phone tightly. He had to take a deep breath to keep his composure, even though he was alone. "Who are you? How did you get my number?" he asked, his tone alarmed. "Someone who knows where she is. But it won't be simple. There are details. If you're truly interested, we'll talk again." Michael's legs felt weak. He took an uncertain step down the corridor, as if seeking support. "Wait, please. Can you tell me something now? Is she okay?" The voice sighed, a sound that seemed weary, perhaps sorrowful. "She's—" it began, but then stopped. "We'll speak soon. If I were you, I wouldn't ignore my next call." A faint crackle marked the end of the line, and before Michael could ask more, the call dropped. He tried calling back, but the screen displayed an invalid number. Frozen for a moment, he ran a hand over his forehead, bewildered. It had to be either a cruel joke or something very serious. The possibility of finding Hannah after all these years filled his chest with both hope and fear. Finally, he might face the past head-on, and, painful as it was, uncover whether the rumors about her having children were true. Pocketing the phone, he took a deep breath and returned to the hall. He needed to maintain his composure for the audience and the press, who were there to cover the charity event. But his mind raced, replaying every word from the mysterious caller. Who could it be? A lawyer? Someone from Hannah's past? And why choose this specific day to reach out? From behind the curtains, he could see some guests leaving the hall while others whispered about the next steps for the shelter funding. A pang of resentment struck him as he noticed one of the advisors being interviewed by a local TV station, seemingly downplaying the company's social initiative as merely a superficial image-cleaning gesture. Michael clenched his fists but forced himself to remain calm. The decisions made that day would shape the company's future over the coming months. He couldn't afford to lose his temper in front of cameras and reporters. As he walked back to the reserved area, his thoughts oscillated between two enormous challenges: securing funding for the shelters and uncovering the truth about Hannah. Much of his next moves would hinge on this cryptic lead. If it proved reliable, he'd need time and caution to investigate. Yet the board was already demanding immediate cuts, with investors unwilling to support any spending they deemed unprofitable. Passing through a wide corridor adorned with posters from past Gray Foundation campaigns, Michael felt the immense weight of everything ahead. Hannah's image intertwined with memories of old laughter, moments when they believed love could weather any storm. Perhaps she never imagined he'd become so consumed by work and money that he neglected their relationship. Perhaps she left out of fear, insecurity, or disappointment. The only certainty was that he had to find her. He needed a chance to ask for forgiveness, or at least to understand what had happened. Outside the building, a cold wind brushed his face, carrying the smells of the city and car exhaust. Michael looked up at the now dark sky, reminded of how the night always made him think of Hannah. In silence, he checked his phone again, but there were no new calls, no messages. That brief, enigmatic call had changed everything. Now, there was hope that it wasn't just a ghost from the past. Feeling a strange mix of anticipation and fear, he climbed into his car. Driving slowly at first, he soon stopped at a traffic light near the event venue. Looking at his reflection in the rearview mirror, he noticed deep circles under his eyes, a face more aged than he remembered, and hair slightly graying at the temples. He would need immense determination to confront the board the next morning and devise a plan to trace whoever had made that call. As much as he wanted to drop everything and immediately search for Hannah, he knew acting recklessly could jeopardize everything. Still, a flicker of hope kept him grounded. Could this truly be his last chance to fix the past? Sighing, he forced a faint smile and moved forward when the light turned green. All his life he had imagined what it would be like to see her again. And now, it felt tangible, within reach. Maybe it could even happen soon. He had to try. When he finally parked at his company building where meetings awaited to assess the event's outcome, he checked his phone once more for missed calls. Nothing new. His heart still pounded harder than he cared to admit. Looking around, he knew this could mark the beginning of a harrowing journey. He was trapped in a corporate machine that cared little for social causes or personal struggles, but he wouldn't abandon the shelters. And above all, he wouldn't give up on finding Hannah. Closing his eyes for a moment, he summoned the determination he'd need to move forward. He had to prove there was still humanity in him, even if this pursuit came at a high price. Summoning courage, he crossed the main entrance and headed to his floor. But every step echoed in his mind, hammering the urgency of that cryptic call. He tried to convince himself he'd find a way to reconcile it all, to pick up the thread connecting him to Hannah and keep alive the projects that meant so much to her. After all, if she was indeed in a shelter supported by the foundation, guilt and hope mingled within him. In the end, one certainty remained. He wouldn't stand idle, paralyzed by the past. Just as he began organizing the papers on his desk, the phone vibrated once more with the same unknown number. He answered, trembling. "You got my message, didn't you?" the mysterious voice asked. "Yes," Michael replied, his breath quickening. "And I'll follow any lead you have." This time, the voice only said they'd be in touch again. No details, no explanations. The call ended abruptly. For a moment, Michael stared at the phone, uncertain whether to celebrate or despair. He had to cling to the hope that there was still a way forward. Above all, he had to believe there was still time to atone for his mistakes. He put the phone down, his heart racing, convinced this might be his only chance to find Hannah and their children. Michael woke up the next morning with even more doubts swirling in his head than the night before. His first instinct was to grab his phone and check for any new messages or calls from the unknown number. Nothing. Just silence, which stirred a mix of anxiety and frustration within him. While sipping a simple cup of coffee in his apartment's kitchenette, he mentally replayed the deep voice of the man from the call. He tried to identify any background noise, a clue that might reveal where the call came from. But each time he recalled the words, they seemed shrouded in a fog of uncertainty. The day's demands quickly took over. Michael's assistant was waiting for him at the company headquarters for a hastily arranged meeting. The board had summoned him to discuss budget adjustments. He knew exactly what that meant. Dressed and carrying the reports he had prepared, he headed down to the parking lot. The drive was short, but every red light felt interminable. Thoughts of Hannah, the possibility of seeing her again, pulsed in his chest, competing with the dread of facing investors who wanted to slash funding for his primary social initiative. Upon arriving at the corporate building, security guards gave him brisk nods as he headed straight for the main elevator. In his hands was a file on the shelters funded by the Gray Foundation, and in his mind, the echo of that anonymous voice lingered. When he entered the meeting room, he found the CFO already there, charts spread across the table displaying projections for profits, expenses, and reallocations that the company needed to make. Other board members were present, each wearing the expression of a human calculator. "Good morning," said the CFO, barely glancing up from the documents. "We need to urgently address the future of our social projects budget. The numbers don't add up." Michael pulled out a chair and sat down, scanning the room and reading the worried economic expressions that so grated on his nerves. "We need to stay committed to the shelters," he said firmly but calmly. "Cutting these funds won't solve the problem in a sustainable way." "Financial health?" the CFO retorted with a sharp look. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. These investments don't yield returns. We should at least have them. We can't keep going like this." Michael felt anger rising but restrained himself from responding harshly. He noticed the hesitant faces of two younger board members who seemed to agree with him but lacked the courage to speak up. Taking a deep breath, he tried to argue by emphasizing the company's reputation as a cornerstone of his case, but an investor near the window interrupted with a caustic remark. The man appeared to be in his 50s, impeccably dressed, with a cold, almost aggressive demeanor. "If it's reputation you want to preserve, Michael, you'd better rethink your strategy. Philanthropy makes for a nice speech, but it doesn't fill shareholders' pockets. You know that better than anyone." Michael pressed his lips together, feeling a slight tremor in his leg. He knew any overreaction could be used against him, and in truth he couldn't deny that the board's pressure was mounting. "I understand the need for revenue," he responded, controlled. "But what sets us apart in the market is precisely this social commitment. If we lose that, we're just another corporation." Tension peaked when the investor stood, pointing an accusatory finger at Michael. "Enough speeches, Gray. I want to see financial results, and I want you to shut down this shelter project for good." Michael's blood almost boiled. Before he could respond, the door opened, and a few security guards, alerted by raised voices, entered, ready to intervene. Feeling suffocated, Michael left the room, leaving the reports on the table and ignoring the puzzled looks from the other board members. In the hallway, he loosened his tie to breathe easier. The situation was spiraling out of control faster than he had anticipated. Minutes later, a relief came when a young IT analyst rushed over, holding a flash drive. He explained that they had managed to trace part of the call Michael had received the previous night. It wasn't much, just a clue that the call had originated from an area near the city's suburbs. The analyst asked Michael to come to the IT room to review some sounds captured from the recording. Without hesitation, Michael followed. He needed to pursue even the smallest lead about Hannah. Inside the IT room, the small team was bustling around computers, screens displaying data and noise identification software. They had fragments of a recording with faint sounds of horns, possibly from buses or trucks passing by. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hypothesize that the call came from an industrial area or something similar. "We couldn't extract much more than this," explained the analyst, a young man with glasses typing rapidly on his keyboard. "But we also traced the owner of a disposable phone that contacted you. He was last seen in an area in the Western Zone where one of the shelters supported by the Gray Foundation is located." Michael thanked him and left, his head pounding. Although it wasn't much, it was a start. Back in his office, he found his assistant poring over a dossier on shelters tied to the foundation. Printed maps, annotations with names that might connect to Hannah or someone with the same initials were spread out. She looked up and showed Michael the materials, pointing to locations in the outskirts. "It could be this shelter here," she said, tracing her finger over a red circle on the map. "It's near an industrial area. They received financial aid last year. If Hannah passed through there under another name, we might find her in old records." Michael felt a surge of hope. He decided to visit the shelter himself. Time was of the essence, but first, he needed to sort out the chaos upstairs. On his way to the elevator, he received a text message about a protest forming in front of the company headquarters. Employees, activists, and beneficiaries of the shelters were outraged at the possibility of funding cuts. He swallowed hard, wondering how to maintain a facade of control amid such turmoil. When he stepped outside, he was met with banners, signs, and a group chanting slogans against the board's actions. Several reporters roamed with microphones. As soon as Michael appeared, cameras turned to him. Some protesters began booing, demanding a clear stance. "We need answers, Michael Gray," shouted a middle-aged woman who seemed to lead the group. "The board wants to shut down the shelters, but where will the women live?" Michael climbed onto a small concrete elevation near a flower bed to make himself heard. "I understand your frustration, and I assure you I'm doing everything possible to keep the shelters open. As long as it's up to me, they will continue to operate." The crowd's noise and camera flashes were deafening. Someone called for silence so Michael could speak, but the crowd remained agitated. He realized the scene was perfect fodder for sensationalist media, which thrived on corporate crises. "Nonetheless," he continued, speaking into a microphone a reporter handed him, "I refuse to end the social project. I've always believed in the importance of supporting those in need. I don't want to live in a world where only profit matters." Some applauded. Others remained skeptical, shouting for him to keep his promises. When he finished, he retreated inside, breathless. The PR advisor pulled him aside, speaking gravely. "Your reputation is hanging by a thread, Michael. If the board ousts you, what will happen to the shelters and everything else?" He didn't answer. He needed to stick to his plan to visit the shelter in the Western Zone. Leaving the communications team to handle the media, he got into his car and headed toward the city's outskirts. Along the way, he remembered a dream where Hannah had appeared, holding a small suitcase, smiling and saying everything would be okay. He longed to regain even a sliver of the security she once gave him, despite the harsh reality. When he arrived at the location, a small brown iron gate separated the sidewalk from an inner courtyard where mothers and children moved about. The site had a tall wall with faded paint and empowering phrases written on colorful murals. Michael rang the bell, and a volunteer greeted him with surprise. As soon as he introduced himself as Michael Gray, her expression lit up. "Oh, the founder himself," she exclaimed, recognizing his name. "We didn't expect your visit. Please come in." Michael entered, observing women caring for babies, others working on crafts. Children played in the courtyard, and everything seemed well organized despite its modest appearance. Inside the shelter, a wall displayed photos of families who had stayed there, along with thank-you notes and messages of gratitude. He cautiously asked if they had records of a woman who might have used another name but was once called Hannah. The volunteer gestured for him to follow her to a makeshift office. There, Michael found a small stack of old files. Although he had helped fund the installation of computers, much of the record-keeping was still done manually. The volunteer flipped through the papers, some yellowed with age, and stopped at a file with an unusual surname resembling Hannah's. The name on it was slightly different, Anna G. Wellington, which might have been a pseudonym. This person never shared much about her story, the volunteer explained, but she was kind, well-liked by the other women. She said she needed a safe place for a while. She stayed here for a month, then moved on. Michael examined the file, noting similarities in birth dates and even the handwriting in the signature. He was sure it was a trace left by Hannah. Clutching the paper to his chest, he felt as if he had found a piece of his shattered life. The woman had reportedly moved to another shelter in a different neighborhood, also supported by the foundation. While he processed this new information, a board member called him. Sensing the urgency, the volunteer left the office. Michael answered, barely concealing his impatience. "Gray, stay away from this," said the voice on the other end. "You don't want to damage your image further, do you?" Michael felt his anger flare. The man didn't even bother to mask his threat. "If you think I'll stop just because a handful of investors see social initiatives as a waste of money, you're mistaken. I'm going all the way." He hung up, irritated but resolute. Holding the file again, he checked every detail for more clues about Hannah. The musty smell of the papers mixed with the sense that he was finally closing in on her whereabouts. Even if it was a small step, he wasn't going to let the opportunity slip away. Back in the courtyard, he briefly thanked the volunteer, promised continued support for the shelter, and stepped outside. Taking a deep breath to steady the surge of emotions within him, he felt exhausted by the double life he was leading. At work, he had to be cold and calculating to protect the shelters. Inside, he was a storm, a void only Hannah could fill. Before leaving, he took one last look around, reflecting on how vital this humble space was to so many women. How could the board even think of cutting funds? Getting into his car, he started the engine, determined to ignore the threats. Murmuring to himself, "If this costs me everything, at least I'll know I did the right thing." As he drove back to the headquarters, he barely noticed the dark clouds gathering, signaling an impending storm. His mind was fixed on two priorities: handling the board and continuing the search for Hannah. Nearly at the building, he was surprised by a throng of journalists crowding the drop-off area. It was just another chapter in the chaos of the week. He maneuvered around them, parked, and felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He answered without checking the number. At that moment, he realized it was another call from the same unknown contact. His heart raced, adrenaline surging through his body. He hesitated for 2 seconds, trying to sound composed, but the voice on the other end didn't give him time to speak. "I have another lead, Michael. I hope you're ready to follow the directions." Michael barely managed to say, "Hello?" before hearing the click of the call ending. He stood frozen, phone in hand, the city noise buzzing around him, the scent of rain in the wind. He needed to find out who was behind this, but at least he was sure he was on the right track. As he walked away from the crowd, looking for a quiet place to gather his thoughts, every step felt heavier than the last. The image of the shelter, the faces of the people who depended on him, and the knowledge that the board was watching his every move, all weighed on him. Yet, a faint glimmer of hope flickered amidst the chaos. As Michael moved further away, the phone rang again, displaying the same unknown number, bringing a new clue to his path forward. Michael was still in the company parking lot when his phone rang again, displaying the same unknown number. His heart skipped a beat, a mix of excitement and apprehension. He answered quickly, the noise of the street and the clamor of protesters audible in the background. "So you decided to go after her, didn't you?" said the voice, low and almost emotionless. "Who are you?" Michael asked, pressing the phone to his ear, trying to block out the exterior noise. The man let out a brief laugh without revealing his identity. "I've already made it clear I know where Hannah is hiding. I just hope you're ready to pay the price to find out. It might not be what you're expecting." Michael felt the tension rise in his neck. He needed to stay calm and not show desperation. "Where is she?" he insisted. "There's a shelter in the northern part of the city. You must have heard of it, haven't you? It was funded by your own foundation. Just be careful. Things could get ugly for you if you keep defying your shareholders." Before Michael could ask for more details, the call disconnected. He gripped his phone tightly, a wave of anxiety coursing through his body. The man had mentioned the board, making it clear there was some connection between the warning and the company's inner workings. But there was no time to theorize. He had to figure out which shelter it was. The Gray Foundation funded many, but the northern area wasn't typically where they established projects. He had to find out quickly. As he entered the building, his assistant greeted him with a concerned expression. She informed him that there would be a critical meeting that afternoon, as the board had organized an emergency vote to suspend all philanthropic investments until further notice. Her alarming tone echoed what Michael already suspected. With his credibility weakened, it was only a matter of time before they tried to undermine him. He took the elevator to his floor, its doors opening to a corridor where 2 security guards were stationed outside the meeting room. Inside, raised voices spilled through the slightly ajar door. Michael entered, finding 5 of the main shareholders, along with the CFO and the Director of Institutional Relations. The atmosphere shifted immediately when he stepped in. "I'm glad you came," said the impeccably dressed man who seemed to be leading the discussion. We want to resolve this once and for all. We can't keep losing money on projects with no return." Michael clenched his fists for a moment but kept his voice neutral. "I don't consider these projects without return. They bring reputation, social impact, and help those in need. It's part of the company's image that we've built." One of the shareholders shook his head impatiently. "Michael, we've been discussing this for days. You're being stubborn. The negative headlines are hurting our stock. And now there are rumors that you've been frequenting shelters, behaving questionably, trying to buy information. Care to explain?" He swallowed hard at the indirect accusation about the alleged bribery the media had been exaggerating. It had been a mistake on his part, true, but one blown out of proportion by malicious gossip. "If we're facing a reputation crisis, it's precisely because part of the board doesn't support philanthropy. This leaves us vulnerable to the press and advocacy groups for the women we assist. We need to unite, not dismantle what gives us credibility." A brief tumult of voices followed. Some board members whispered among themselves. The director of institutional relations cleared his throat. "The voting proposal is simple. Freeze all investment in social projects for the coming months until the dust settles. Not a cent will be released. If your foundation wants to continue existing, it must do so independently of the company." Michael looked at each face in the room. This represented a severe blow to the shelters, which would have to survive without corporate funding. He knew that if he didn't block this proposal, women and children would be left without support. Worst of all, Hannah might have ended up in one of these places under a different name and risked being expelled if funding ran out. "I'm prepared to take any consequences," he declared, holding the folder containing the Gray Foundation's financials. "But you won't approve this easily. I'm asking for time to prove these projects are viable. At least give me a chance to present results." "You have until tomorrow to show us something, Gray," said the impeccably dressed man standing. "If you don't bring new facts, the vote proceeds, and we'll terminate these expenditures." Michael bit the inside of his cheek. He had just 24 hours to find something to convince those investors, and he also had the riddle from the recent call, a shelter in the northern zone, tied to his own foundation. He left the room with his heart racing, his assistant close behind. "Do you think you can turn this around?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. "I don't know, but I need to be on the ground," he replied, tucking the folder under his arm. "And I need every file mentioning shelters in the northern zone. That mysterious contact gave me a lead." She nodded and hurried off to organize everything. Michael returned to his office to check the records from recent years. Amid spreadsheets, something caught his attention. A women's shelter called United Hands, recently opened thanks to an emergency grant from the foundation. It was located in a relatively isolated area with few surrounding homes, possibly the perfect place for someone wanting to remain hidden. He spent precious minutes reviewing the information, verifying names and dates. Then he noticed a detail. The site was managed by a partner organization with limited contact details. Once the shelter received its initial funding, few updates had been sent to the foundation. It seemed to be a discreet or neglected place with little promotion. Without wasting more time, Michael left the building. Outside, he saw the press still circling the headquarters but didn't bother to answer their questions. He needed to reach the northern zone before the day ended. While driving, he was caught in a heavy downpour, the windshield wipers working overtime. The city descended into chaos with honking horns, people running along sidewalks, and endless traffic jams. Still, he persisted, navigating side streets and seeking alternate routes to reach his destination as quickly as possible. He arrived in an industrial neighborhood with rusted warehouses and a few scattered modest homes. Amid poorly paved, dark streets, he found a discreet metal sign reading, "United Hands." A simple, stained wall enclosed a small two-story building. The rain continued to pour. He parked near the gate and stepped out, the cold wind hitting his face. Pressing the doorbell yielded no immediate response. After a few moments, a tired-looking woman, possibly a volunteer or staff member, opened the gate. She seemed wary of the elegant man standing there in the pouring rain. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone cautious. "I'm Michael Gray. I'm the founder who helped fund this place. I'd like to speak with someone in charge, if possible. It's urgent." She frowned but nodded, leading him inside through a narrow, dimly lit hallway. A faint light bulb hanging from the ceiling guided them to a small, improvised reception area. There, another woman, who appeared to be the coordinator, stood up upon recognizing him. "Mr. Gray!" she exclaimed, alarmed. "We didn't know you were coming. What brings you here?" Michael explained calmly that he wanted to verify how the funds were being used and, more importantly, to see if there was any woman registered under a different name who might actually be Hannah. The coordinator exchanged glances with the other volunteer. She then retrieved an old folder, spreading it open on a table. "We haven't had many long-term residents recently," she said, flipping through the yellowed pages. "This place isn't very well known. But let me see. Here, look. We've had a few recent arrivals. Anna Green, another woman named Clarice, and—" She paused, frowning. Michael's heart raced. "And—" he pressed. "Well, this woman arrived about 3 weeks ago. She came with 2 children. She said she couldn't give her real name but left an old contact and left without notice. She had help from another donor, as far as I understand. She didn't stay long. I kept the file because she seemed very frightened." Michael struggled to contain his anxiety. The story aligned with his fears. Hannah could indeed have children and might be living in hiding. The coordinator hesitated to provide further details, citing the delicate nature of the case. At that moment, someone knocked on the back door. The volunteer went to answer and returned hurriedly, saying a group was outside protesting potential funding cuts. It seemed like déjà vu from the company headquarters, and rough-looking security personnel had arrived to contain the commotion. Michael moved to a window, peering through the fogged glass at a crowd with signs, shouting slogans against the suspension of funding. Suddenly, a burly man who appeared to work for someone on the board stepped in, shoving protesters away. Michael left the room, descending a few steps to the backyard, where a small crowd had gathered. The light rain made everything more chaotic, with puddles forming everywhere. "Stop!" Michael shouted, approaching. "Let's stay calm." But it was too late. One of the guards pushed a protester, sparking a scuffle. Shouts echoed through the yard, someone slipped and the signs scattered. Michael, tempted to break up the fight, was grabbed by another guard who recognized him and tried to pull him back. "Mr. Gray, you need to leave. This is getting dangerous." He broke free. The fear of seeing the shelter's image splashed across the news as a sight of violence was stronger than his personal fear. Michael raised his hands, trying to mediate the fight, but one protester insisted on charging at a guard, escalating the chaos for several minutes. Only when the police arrived did things begin to settle down. With sirens blaring and lights flashing, the protesters dispersed and the guards stepped back. Michael felt his body trembling, a mix of anger and helplessness. If keeping the funding was already challenging, now, with this incident, everything became even more complicated. He took a deep breath, drenched from the rain and muddy, and returned to the shelter's interior, where the coordinator awaited him, apprehensive. "I'm sorry for the commotion," she said, handing him a towel to dry his face. "The fear of closing our doors drives people to revolt. We're afraid that if your company cuts the funding, we won't be able to house even half of the women and children who need us." Michael nodded, feeling a tightness in his chest. He reassured her that he wouldn't let that happen. Then the coordinator handed him a yellowed envelope. "The woman who passed through here, the one you suspect might be Hannah, left this. It's addressed to the Gray Foundation. I thought it best to keep it, just in case someone came looking." Michael's eyes widened at the sight of his surname on the envelope. He swallowed hard, sensing that it could hold answers or perhaps another riddle. He didn't have the courage to open it there, in front of everyone. He thanked her and tucked the envelope inside his jacket. He left with promises to find solutions, ensuring that the shelter wouldn't be abandoned. Outside, the yard was nearly empty, with only a few officers gathering information. The walk back to his car was tense. Raindrops still trickled down his hair, and his head throbbed with everything that had happened. Sitting in the driver's seat, he took a deep breath before starting the engine. He recalled Hannah's words echoing in his memory, about how she dreamed of her art projects inspiring women to break free from toxic relationships. Perhaps that's exactly what she was doing at that very moment, but far from him. When traffic finally eased and Michael parked at the company warehouse, it was late afternoon. He climbed to his office, locked the door, and stood there, alone, staring at the yellowed envelope. He carefully picked it up, wiping the still damp surface. It felt as though he was about to open a door to the past, filled with answers or perhaps new questions. With trembling hands, he broke the envelope's seal. Inside, there was a single folded sheet of paper. However, before he had the chance to read it, one sentence stood out on the outside of the envelope, written in black ink. 2 short words, pleading for understanding. He swallowed hard, his breath suspended. Michael held the unopened letter, his hands shaking, and read the phrase on the envelope. "Forgive me." Michael took almost 10 minutes to summon the courage to open the paper inside the envelope. After reading those 2 words on the outside, his heart pounded like a drum, each beat pulling him deeper into a reality he feared to face. As he pulled out the folded sheet, he took a deep breath and unfolded it, recognizing Hannah's handwriting. Delicate strokes, slightly shaky, as if she had been emotional while writing. The first line offered an apology for leaving him without explanations. Below that were mentions of something he never imagined reading so soon. "Our 2 children," appeared amidst the text, sending a shudder through Michael's body. He read that part repeatedly, his mind racing back to the time Hannah had disappeared without mentioning she was pregnant. In silence, he wondered how different things might have been if he had known, if he had given her the attention she deserved. The letter continued, explaining that she had been too afraid to tell him the truth, that she felt insecure and, by the time she decided to leave, was convinced his indifference was irreversible. She wrote about disappointments, describing how she had grown fearful seeing Michael drown himself in work and ambition, ignoring the signs that their relationship was crumbling. As Michael continued reading, the pain deepened. Hannah asked for forgiveness for not trusting him, but admitted she fled to protect the children from a life filled with unhappiness, devoid of affection, and marked by fights. She revealed that she had tried to return at some point but heard rumors that Michael had become consumed by business, leaving no room for anything personal. She wrote that she felt the need to move forward, convinced there was no place for her within the empire he had built. The final lines ended on a pleading note. She asked Michael not to judge her harshly and urged him to care for the shelters, saying they were the only hope for many other women. The date at the end of the letter showed it had been written over a year ago. This meant Hannah had been in hiding with the children for quite some time. She had passed through one of the shelters without mustering the courage to contact him directly, perhaps fearing judgment or exposure. Michael let the paper fall onto the desk and leaned back in his office chair. A wave of sorrow washed over him, as if reliving the day he first noticed Hannah's absence. He remembered coming home after an endless meeting and not finding her scent in the air, her clothes in the closet, or her smile at the door. He could never have imagined that her leaving included 2 children he had never met. Running his hand across his face, he fought back tears that threatened to spill. At that moment, his phone rang. He hesitated to answer, still dazed by the letter. When he picked up, the urgent voice of one of the company's board members came through. "Michael, we have a serious problem. The press got wind of your disappearance," the man said, his tone accusatory. "Someone leaked that you've been searching shelters for your missing wife. They're spinning it as a family scandal." Michael's stomach churned. The thought of having such a personal issue exposed in the media was terrifying. A family scandal? What else are they saying? He asked tensely. The headlines suggest you might be involved in her disappearance. It's absurd, but that's the narrative spreading. They want to use this against you and the company. We need an immediate response, or the stock price could plummet. Ending the call, Michael felt a suffocating pressure. As if the emotional turmoil of discovering he had children wasn't enough, now he had to deal with baseless accusations from the media. The board would undoubtedly exploit this to pressure him to abandon his charity projects, perhaps even to oust him as CEO. He had to act. Heading to the main floor to confront the board member who had called, Michael was intercepted by a press aide who warned him, "Michael, there's a group of reporters in the lobby. They're asking about Hannah's whereabouts. They claim there's evidence you'd go to any lengths to find her, even using illegal methods." Michael rolled his eyes, frustrated. He was certain he hadn't done anything illegal, but vividly recalled a moment of desperation when he had tried to bribe a shelter coordinator for information. It was an impulsive act that could indeed be framed as an attempt to obtain confidential data. The journalists wouldn't forgive such a mistake. As he hurried down the corridor, he ran into the same investor who had called him earlier, flanked by the CFO. The two cornered him near the water cooler, both looking grim. "What's this about a bribery attempt, Michael?" the investor demanded. "Have you lost your sense of judgment? Do you know how much this compromises us?" The CFO chimed in. "We've received reports that you offered money to a shelter coordinator for information about Hannah. If this goes public, it will be a complete disaster. This is hard evidence of an attempt to buy private information." Michael clenched his jaw, remembering that desperate day. Overwhelmed by his need to find out if Hannah was there, he had indeed pushed the limits. Now, it was all coming back to haunt him like a ticking bomb. I was desperate," he admitted reluctantly. "I just wanted to find my wife. I didn't think it would escalate like this." "Desperate or not, you were naive and reckless," the investor shot back with disdain. "The media will eat you alive. If you don't make a public retraction, we'll have to reconsider your position in the company." Michael inhaled deeply, dreading how the board would react. They would undoubtedly use this crisis to pressure him to shut down his philanthropic initiatives or even strip him of his CEO role. His fears were confirmed that afternoon when headlines began to flood news sites and social media. Some read, "Michael Gray buys information about missing wife," while others insinuated he was covering up a crime. The public humiliation grew relentlessly. Sensationalist tabloids drew dubious connections, suggesting that if Hannah had fled, there must be sinister reasons. As night fell, offering little respite, Michael sat in his office, staring at the city lights reflecting off the windows. Inside, everything felt dark and empty. He flipped through reports without absorbing a word, his stomach churning with anxiety. He needed a way out of this crisis, but every decision he had made seemed to dig him deeper into the mess. The public humiliation was so overwhelming that he couldn't imagine continuing to lead the company. At the same time, the image of Hannah and the children loomed large in his mind. He couldn't ignore the truth he had uncovered. He was a father who had never even seen his children's faces. Feeling completely drained, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. A flash of memory struck him. Hannah at home, smiling with a paintbrush in hand and a blank canvas before her. He remembered how she often spoke of wanting to live far from bureaucracy, creating art and helping those in need. Her laughter echoed in his mind, a sound that once brought color to his world. Then another flash hit him. Himself at the dining table, buried in piles of documents and reports, barely noticing her attempts to talk about their future plans. The memory brought a pang of guilt for letting ambition blind him. He recalled the letter's painful truths. Hannah had spoken of feeling abandoned, unsupported when she needed him most, of how money and status had consumed him until there was no room for the partnership they once shared. Her words burned in his mind, sparking deep regret. The door opened, and Jonas, an old college friend Michael trusted, walked in. Jonas looked slightly disheveled, his expression a mix of concern and cautious optimism. "I saw the media frenzy, Michael. I even met with a few lawyers to discuss the risks, but, well, I'm guessing you're not in the mood for legal talk now." Michael gave a sad smile. "Glad you're here, Jonas. I don't know what to do anymore. I need a miracle to get out of this mess." Jonas pulled up a chair and sat beside him, placing a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. "You can still make things right, but it's time to play it straight. No bribery, no power games. If you want to find Hannah and your children, do it transparently. And above all, don't let the board manipulate you into abandoning the one thing that still represents your positive legacy." Michael nodded slowly, as if Jonas's words were a balm. He needed to remember why he had created the Gray Foundation in the first place. It wasn't just for appearances. It was also to honor Hannah's values, her belief in providing refuge for women in vulnerable situations. His eyes brightened at the thought. "You're right," he said with a sigh. "It's not too late to fix this." Jonas lowered his head, scrolling on his phone. "By the way, there's something you need to see. I received a strange email with attached photos from an anonymous sender. At first I thought it was a prank, but..." He held up his phone, showing an image of a woman with 2 children. "Take a good look at this person." Michael took the phone cautiously. The photo showed a woman from behind, dressed simply, and 2 children playing in the yard of an unfamiliar house. Judging by the angle, the photographer seemed to have been hidden at a distance. While the faces weren't entirely clear, the woman's figure and the way the children played stood out. Michael's heart raced with a mix of hope and fear. "Jonas, do you think it's her?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the screen. "I think so. I compared it with old photos of Hannah. The resemblance is strong. And the children, they look about 3 or 4, don't they? It's not impossible they're yours." Michael enlarged the image, his thumb brushing over the screen. Despite the poor resolution, it was evident one of the children had a peculiar smile that reminded him of photos from his own childhood. The other held a crayon, likely trying to draw something on the ground. "Where did this email come from?" he asked. "I don't know. The accompanying text only says that Hannah is being supported by someone or some group helping her stay out of the spotlight. It also mentions that the kids are safe, but she remains cautious. It could be someone warning you or trying to manipulate you. I wasn't sure, but I thought you should see it." Michael's entire body was gripped by a determination he hadn't felt in a long time. This was nearly tangible evidence that Hannah and the children were out there, that he could find them, and it hinted at others being involved, possibly people from the board or outside, using this as leverage. "I'm not stopping now," he said, standing up and clenching his fists at his sides. "Even if the company tries to bring me down, even if the media crucifies me, I won't give up. Lives are at stake, Jonas, Hannah, and my children. I'll fight everyone if I have to." Jonas gave a faint smile, seemingly proud to see Michael regain his resolve. "You don't have to do this alone. Count on me. But remember, full transparency from now on. Any misstep, and they'll destroy you completely." Michael nodded, feeling that this marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He needed to devise a plan to balance defending the shelters with his search for his family. He knew he would have to face every blackmail attempt, every hostile investor, and every sensationalist reporter. But seeing those images made him realize there was no turning back. Now he needed to uncover who this mysterious benefactor supporting Hannah was and why they were keeping her hidden. Before Jonas left, Michael thanked him and spent a few more minutes studying the photos. He noticed the faint outline of Hannah's profile and the children running innocently. They were, without a doubt, pieces of himself scattered in the world. Perhaps there was still time to right his wrongs and build something new. He had to try. As Jonas stood by the door, Michael raised the photos once more, scrutinizing every detail. His heart filled with a bittersweet yet powerful hope. He was ready to risk everything for the chance to embrace those children, even if it would be for the first time in his life. Michael woke up that morning with the overwhelming feeling that every minute would be precious. Pressure from the board was mounting, and the headlines about his search for Hannah were still trending on social media. He knew that, at any moment, he could lose everything: his prestige, the presidency, and even the chance to make amends for the past. The last letter he had received, the photos of the children, confirmed Hannah was nearby but unwilling to show herself. Adding to the tension, the thought that his children might be living their lives unaware of his existence was a constant ache. He had to act, even if it meant taking risks. As soon as he arrived at the company headquarters, Michael sensed something was off. Employees glanced at him with expressions of pity or curiosity. Many whispered as he passed through the halls. Likely the rumors of his attempts to reunite with his missing wife had become a daily soap opera among the staff. He tried not to let it get to him. His priority was staying resolute, not letting anger or humiliation deter him. Just before entering the boardroom for another round of discussions, his phone rang. It was Jonas, his friend, with a new piece of information. Local media outlets were now reporting that Hannah didn't want to see him and had outright refused any contact. The news crushed Michael's hopes. Maybe she still held a grudge, feared his influence, or was simply protecting the children. It was impossible to know for sure, but it was a bitter blow to his dreams of a peaceful reunion. Michael hung up and pushed open the boardroom door. Inside were 3 board members and 2 investors, all waiting to discuss the foundation's future. The tension was palpable. One of them opened a laptop and immediately displayed reports showing the company's declining stock values over the past few weeks. The sensational news stories had shaken market confidence, and the social investment projects were now seen as a financial liability. "We need immediate results," said the board member on the left, twirling a sleek metal pen impatiently. "If you keep pushing this shelter and philanthropy agenda, we're going to lose more money. Isn't it clear by now that this is unsustainable?" Michael took a deep breath, meeting each of their gazes. "What's unsustainable is pretending we have no responsibility. Have you forgotten these shelters' housewomen and children who have nowhere else to go?" One of the investors scoffed. "That's noble in theory, Gray, but it doesn't pay dividends. Let's be honest, philanthropy doesn't fill shareholder pockets, and frankly, many suspect you're using the shelters as a cover to hunt down your wife." Michael's jaw tightened, silent fury simmering beneath his composed exterior. As much as he hated to admit it, there was some truth in the accusation. His personal motives did intertwine with the social causes he championed. Still, that didn't diminish the shelter's real value. He chose his words carefully, keeping his voice steady. "My personal journey doesn't negate the importance of this work. If you cut funding, you'll be harming countless families who depend on the foundation for survival." "Don't play the saint," another board member shot back. "We're here to make a profit. The company can't take any more media fallout. Maybe it's time to shut down the shelter program, at least temporarily, until the storm passes." Michael rose from his chair, his determination evident as he looked each of them in the eye. "You can remove me if you want, but I won't authorize any funding cuts. Pressure me all you like, but I will not dismantle the work we've built over the years." The room fell into a tense silence. Michael knew he was treading on thin ice. Most of the board leaned toward stripping him of his decision-making power. Still, he refused to back down. With deliberate steps, he left the room, ignoring their shouts calling him insubordinate. Outside, his assistant was waiting with a distressed expression. She informed him of a larger protest erupting outside one of the largest shelters funded by the foundation. Without hesitation, Michael rushed to the parking lot, got into his car, and headed to the site. He needed to see the situation firsthand. When he arrived, the street was blocked by protesters holding banners and chanting against injustices and threats of closure. Many signs demanded more resources for women at risk. As he stepped out of the car, some recognized him and surrounded him, demanding answers about whether they would lose support. He tried to respond, but the chaos was overwhelming. On one side were journalists, activists, and volunteers. On the other were security personnel and sympathizers of the board, all vying to voice their opinions. Inside the shelter, the atmosphere was even more tense. Mothers with children in their arms were terrified they'd be turned out if funding was cut. A teary-eyed volunteer grabbed Michael's hand, pleading, "Mr. Gray, many of these women are fleeing death threats. If we lose the shelter, where will they go?" Michael reassured her that he was doing everything possible to maintain the funding. The truth, however, was that if the board voted to cut the budget, there was little he could do. Even so, he refused to show despair. At that moment, reporters stormed in, cameras flashing, bombarding him with questions. "Are you closing the shelters? Is it true this is all a ploy to find your wife? What are your intentions now, Michael Gray?" He raised his hands for calm, taking a deep breath to compose his thoughts. He felt like a defendant in a media trial. Looking past the cameras at the women and children in the shelter, he couldn't help but imagine Hannah as one of them, knocking on a shelter's door for help, had she never crossed paths with him. "I will not close anything," he declared, facing the cameras. "My priority is to keep these shelters running, regardless of what the board decides. I understand the financial stakes, but I will not allow these lives to be sacrificed." His statement drew mixed reactions. Some applauded, while others remained skeptical. Amid the uproar, a child ran up and hugged him, perhaps mistaking him for some sort of savior. The gesture struck a chord, reminding him of the children he'd never met. A camera clicked, capturing the scene, and Michael knew it could either bolster or tarnish his image further, depending on the narrative. As tensions escalated, a black car screeched to a stop outside. Two imposing men stepped out, clearly enforcers for a powerful investor or local politician. They began pushing protesters and threatened to shut the gates if the crowd didn't disperse. Alarmed, Michael intervened, asking them to stand down. One man shoved a young woman who tried to argue. Michael stepped between them, grabbing the man's arm to stop him. The confrontation nearly escalated into violence, but volunteers and security managed to separate everyone before it got worse. Still, the sight of Michael being restrained would undoubtedly dominate the evening news. "You see the chaos this brings?" the man shouted, pointing a finger at Michael. "This is what you want? No money, no shelter. Shut it down and stay out of this." Michael's blood boiled. Around him, children clung to their mothers. Volunteers looked on in fear, and the weight of the moment was crushing. He took a step back, but not in retreat. He couldn't abandon these people. The chaos only subsided when police arrived, dispersing the crowd and detaining the two men for questioning. Exhausted and disheveled, Michael helped the young woman up. She was shaken, but unhurt. Thanking him with tears in her eyes, she embodied the vulnerability he was fighting to protect. As he drove back to the office under a drizzling sky, Michael knew he was running out of time. The board's hostility was growing, and whispers of a conspiracy loomed in his mind. Who was pulling strings to keep Hannah away? Why were these enforcers showing up at protests? His assistant met him at the company entrance, her face pale. "Michael, we need to talk. The board has just called an emergency meeting. They're voting on your dismissal." Michael entered the meeting room feeling as if a dense cloud hovered above him. The room was filled with executives and board members, all wearing stern expressions. He had been warned that today would determine whether he would remain at the helm of the company. The sound of his own breathing was loud in his ears. For a moment he thought he wouldn't be able to utter a single word. Still, he clenched his fists and pressed forward. The chairman of the board, a gray-haired man with a steely gaze, adjusted his glasses before speaking. On the table, yellowed papers mingled with brand-new folders, as if attempting to illustrate two distinct eras of the company. Looking directly at Michael, he cleared his throat. "We've received numerous reports that your personal conduct is affecting the corporation's image. The press won't stop talking about your search for your missing wife and—" He leafed through a document. "Your attempts to maintain investments in shelters that, according to many shareholders, are causing financial losses." Michael took a deep breath. He felt as if this statement was the first step in a verdict that could end his journey with the company he had helped build. He straightened his shoulders, trying to maintain his composure. "It's true that my personal life is exposed," he said, his voice firm. "And I regret any problems this may have caused the company's image, but I cannot ignore the importance of these shelters. Without them, dozens of women and children would be left on the streets without protection. Gray Foundation has always been known for balancing profit with social responsibility. Undoing that would completely destroy our reputation." A wave of murmurs filled the room. Some board members whispered among themselves, exchanging uncertain glances. An investor in an impeccable suit stood up. "And you think with all these scandals we still have a reputation to save?" The question came out almost aggressively. "The media portrays you as a desperate man, willing to buy information about your wife. Many believe your efforts with these projects are just a facade. It's your name at the center of all this, Gray." The chairman raised a hand, calling for silence. Then he consulted some papers again. "We need to vote on whether Michael Gray will remain CEO. Let's proceed to the vote," he ordered. "Who is in favor of his immediate removal?" Some hands went up. Michael felt a chill as he realized many of them belonged to powerful figures within the company. However, there were still hesitant faces. Some board members, perhaps recognizing the value of philanthropy or holding personal respect for him, did not raise their hands. The chairman spoke again. "I see the group is divided. I propose a compromise. Michael Gray will be given a temporary suspension of 30 days. Effective immediately, he will have no decision-making power in management until everything is clarified and the accusations against him are resolved. If, at the end of this period, the company's image does not improve, we will proceed with full dismissal." The relief Michael felt was only partial. He was being sidelined, and during that time, he would have no control over anything. Any changes in investment policies could be made without his input. Still, he preferred this over outright dismissal. He nodded, a mix of defeat and anger in his eyes. "Understood," he replied, holding back the urge to protest. "I will do my best to prove my innocence and show why these shelters are essential." As he left, some board members avoided looking at him. Among them, the CFO whispered something to the impeccably dressed investor, who let out a dry laugh. Michael tried to remain composed but felt as if the ground beneath him was giving way. At this rate, nothing would prevent him from being permanently replaced. In the corridor, Jonas approached him, holding an envelope in his hands. "Hey, I know this isn't the best time, but I have something to show you. I've been reviewing the Foundation's most recent projects, and I found something that might interest you." They headed to the private office Michael still occupied, though it now felt like a temporary eviction notice, and closed the door. Jonas opened the envelope. The Gray Foundation created a grant last year for artists in vulnerable situations, remember? Well, this year's shortlist is out. Here it is. He pointed to a name. Hannah Gray. Or rather, Hannah Evans, as she signed up. I recognized some details. She's among the selected candidates. Michael blinked, stunned. Hannah, applying for an art grant from his own foundation? It felt surreal. He recalled how he had proposed this project to support women wishing to study abroad, particularly in fields like painting and illustration. The pieces seemed to align. Hannah had always been passionate about painting, and now she might be on the verge of securing this resource, without even knowing he was behind it. She probably didn't even realize it was his old home, the Gray Foundation, funding the grant. If she wins, she might leave the country for good, Jonas remarked, concerned. And you won't have time to do anything about it. Michael sank into his chair. He imagined Hannah fleeing again, this time definitively. With the opportunity to study abroad, she could take the children and disappear completely. "She already refused to meet me before," he said, his voice faltering. "Now she might have even more reasons to stay away. Have you thought that if she finds out the grant is mine, she might refuse it out of pride or fear?" Jonas stared at him, serious. That's the issue, Michael. You need to fix this mess here. The grant isn't confirmed yet. She's only been shortlisted. But if everything unfolds without your intervention, she could vanish off the map. You need to find a middle ground, or at the very least, prepare to talk to her, tell her the truth, admit your mistakes. If you don't, you'll lose her for good. Michael nodded. He already felt close to breaking down. He had just been suspended from the presidency and, at the same time, learned that Hannah was taking another step toward vanishing, should she secure the grant. His phone vibrated on the desk. It was Jonas again, this time forwarding a link to a local news story. Michael clicked on it, and a headline appeared. Mysterious young artist and her children shine at cultural event. He pressed play to watch the video. A reporter covered a small arts festival in a local community, and briefly, a slender woman with tied-back hair appeared who looked very much like Hannah. Beside her, 2 children could be seen playing. One of them had a smile identical to the one Michael saw in the mirror as a child. His heart skipped a beat, remembering how, in recent photos, he had recognized the same feature on the face of his possible son. He couldn't keep his composure. He paused the video and just stared at the screen, eyes brimming with tears. "Did you see how grown they've gotten?" Jonas commented from the corner of the room. "You can't waste any more time. If she declines the grant, she won't sustain herself, and if she accepts, she'll move to another country. Either way, you need to act." Michael diverted his gaze from the phone, swallowing the lump in his throat. He was on the verge of tears, overwhelmed with emotion and desperation. He needed to refocus. "Jonas, help me think of a plan." He ran a hand through his hair, trying to clear his thoughts. "I can't resolve the chaos in the company right now. But even away from the presidency, I can try, a direct partnership with small NGOs. I can use my personal influence, even without formal board approval. If we can form alliances, we might sustain part of the shelter funding without fully relying on the board, at least for a while." Jonas nodded in agreement. If the board wants to suspend everything, the responsibility falls on them. But if you have support from NGOs and independent associations, you can keep providing support, and at the same time, prove it wasn't just empty rhetoric. That could help clean up your image. Michael quickly jotted down some ideas, compiling a list of organizations that could help him keep the projects alive. But as he wrote, a torrent of memories overwhelmed him. He recalled how, at the start of their marriage, Hannah had spoken of her desire to paint murals and travel the world to learn new techniques. Yet he had been so consumed by business that he never had time to support her dreams. Every sketch she made was relegated to a corner of the house until they disappeared among the papers he brought from the office. Perhaps this had been the tipping point of her departure. She felt ignored, with no encouragement to pursue the life she wanted. "I got lost in ambition," he whispered, his eyes fixed on his notes. "If I had listened to her earlier, none of this would be happening." Jonas said nothing, but his compassionate gaze showed he understood. There was a certain respect for the fact that Michael was finally acknowledging his own faults. It was his neglect that had paved the way for the rift. Now he was trying to make amends for years of absence. "I'll track down the address of this cultural event," he said, standing abruptly. "It's in the article, isn't it? If I can reach Hannah, maybe I can explain, talk about the grant, tell her I don't want to force her into anything, but that I'm changing for us. That I want, at least, to meet my children." Jonas offered a slight smile of encouragement. "This might be your best chance. But remember, if she's truly decided not to speak to you, she might refuse to hear you. Even so, you have to try." Michael picked up his phone and reviewed the article again, noting the festival's location. It was a neighborhood not far from the city, a simple area known for street artists and independent exhibitions. He needed to verify if Hannah was still there or if it had just been a one-time appearance. Either way, for the first time, he had a solid and recent lead. Before leaving, he left notes for his assistant, asking her to contact a few small NGOs he knew. He needed to consolidate support for the shelters. If the board ousted him completely, At least he could ensure no one was left unprotected. Then, he could focus entirely on the reunion he longed for. Crossing the building's lobby, he passed employees who looked at him with surprise or pity. After all, news of his suspension was already spreading through the corridors. He didn't want to dwell on formalities or goodbyes. He had the rest of the day to kickstart this effort with the NGOs and then dive headfirst into finding Hannah. He knew she might flee again, but he needed, at the very least, to say everything that had been bottled up. He stepped into the street, feeling the warm afternoon breeze, and looked up at the sky, where clouds drifted lazily. He thought about how life's twists could be cruel, but also granted moments of hope. Leaning against his car, he took one last look at his phone, seeing the picture of Hannah and the children playing in the festival yard. The boy's face, with a smile so much like his own, seemed to remind him that it's never too late to change. Michael took a deep breath, got into the car, and thought, "If it's now or never, I'm not missing this chance to see them." Michael drove through the suburbs with his knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. The afternoon was advancing, and the low sun cast long shadows on the street. He followed the address of the cultural event he had read about in the local news, believing Hannah might be there. His heart raced, but he focused on the road, weaving through congested avenues and seeking shortcuts to reach his destination faster. Every passing second unsettled him. He feared arriving too late and finding her gone, perhaps already off to another unknown place. After a long drive, he arrived in a modest neighborhood with low buildings and winding alleys. Colorful posters taped to lampposts announced a community art show. He parked by a small square where people chatted animatedly, holding flyers. Around him, graffiti-covered walls depicted scenes of struggle and hope, emblematic of independent artistic projects. Everything about the place exuded creativity and resilience, a setting that perfectly matched Hannah's personality. He parked in a corner and took a deep breath before stepping out of the car. He needed to prepare for whatever was to come. Walking along a narrow street, he followed makeshift signs pointing to the festival. By now, the sunlight had turned a soft golden hue, ideal for photos and outdoor performances. From a distance, he spotted a small improvised bandstand surrounded by tables displaying artists' works, painted canvases, sculptures made of scrap metal, local crafts. Music played through simple speakers, giving the event a relaxed atmosphere. He passed stalls selling snacks and drinks, scanning for any sign of Hannah. Perhaps a panel with her name or an exhibition of paintings she had signed. The memory of her painting in her home studio years ago suddenly overwhelmed him. He had to steady himself, determined not to lose focus. He needed to be clear-headed, find her, explain himself, rebuild her trust, or at least show her that he had changed. He approached a man tending a stand of watercolor paintings. "Excuse me, do you know where Hannah Evans's paintings are being exhibited?" he asked, sweating lightly from anxiety. The man scratched his sparse beard thoughtfully. "Hannah Evans? I'm not sure, but there's a woman over by the warehouse who might know. Her name's Marta." Michael thanked him and followed the directions, weaving through the crowd of smiling people admiring the artwork. He felt out of place in his formal attire, contrasting sharply with the casual, laid-back vibe of the event. Adding to his unease, his mind churned with thoughts about his business troubles, the suspension of his CEO role, and the investors' pressure to abandon philanthropic projects. He found Marta, a woman with a welcoming smile and her hair tied up in a colorful scarf. She greeted him warmly but seemed puzzled by his formal appearance. "Hannah Evans? Yes, she's here. Or was. I think she's in the backstage area of the warehouse adding final touches to her exhibit. She came with 2 kids, if I'm not mistaken." Michael's heart nearly leaped out of his chest. Hannah and 2 kids. The confirmation filled him with equal parts hope and fear. He forced a smile to mask his nerves. "Could you show me where that backstage area is, please?" She hesitated, perhaps suspicious, but eventually pointed to a side door on a low brick building where artists were carrying paints and musical instruments. It's over there, but be careful. Everyone's focused on their preparations. This event is small, but each person has their role to play." Thanking her, Michael headed toward the slightly ajar door of the warehouse. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with creativity. Paintbrushes, paints, fabrics, and boxes were scattered down the hall. Animated voices filled the air as artists made final adjustments to frames and checked the improvised lighting. He moved cautiously, scrutinizing every face. Suddenly, he heard the sound of children laughing from a room to his left. His heart skipped a beat. Could they be his children? He stepped toward the door, but before he could peek inside, a tall man in a dark suit appeared, looking as out of place as Michael but exuding an air of authority. "Excuse me, can I help you?" the man asked, his tone hostile. Michael took a step back. Something about the man reminded him of security guards at protests, always ready to stir up trouble. He introduced himself vaguely, saying he was looking for a friend who might be there. "No one here can be approached without permission," the man replied coldly, "unless you're a guest of the sponsor. And who are you?" Michael's stomach churned. The mention of a sponsor hinted at someone funding the event, possibly a benefactor who had drawn Hannah close. He tried to deflect. "I'm just here to appreciate the art of someone I know. They said her name is Hannah Evans." The man's eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Sorry, but you need a visitor badge. And as far as I can see, you're not on the list. My orders are clear. No one gets in without authorization." Michael considered arguing, but feared drawing attention or causing a scene that might disrupt the event. He would have to tread carefully. Even so, he wouldn't back down now that he was so close. As he pondered his next move, another figure appeared, a man who looked like an aide to a high-profile executive, dressed in tailored trousers and a fine shirt. He whispered something to the tall man, who then turned back to Michael. "If you're so interested, let's see if Hannah confirms your presence. Wait here." The man entered the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Michael held his breath, straining to hear snippets of conversation. He caught only muffled voices, including a surprised feminine tone, followed by a quick exchange of words. Then there was the sound of objects falling to the floor. His anxiety spiked. He wanted to rush in, but if he waited just a bit longer, he might glean more information. Moments later, the man returned to the door. "She says she doesn't want to speak with you. Please leave." Michael felt every fiber of his being resist. Hannah didn't want to see him? Desperate, he tried to peer over the man's shoulder but saw little, just a glimpse of two children in the back, playing with something. He was almost certain they were his children, but the room was dimly lit, and art supplies cluttered the floor. In a moment of desperation, he gently pushed past the man and called out, "Hannah, it's me, Michael. Please, hear me out." Voices of protest erupted, followed by Hannah appearing from the opposite hallway. Her expression carried a mix of shock, fear, and lingering hurt. The man in the suit tried to block her path, but she raised a hand, signaling him to stop. Still, she remained a few steps away, her chest heaving as if his mere presence had shaken her deeply. They stared at each other in silence for what felt like an eternity. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face was resolute. Michael wanted to move closer, but her defensive stance warned him not to. "How did you find me?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. "It was a long search. Clues, photos, the letter you left. I had to see you, Hannah. I needed to know if you were okay." The suited man moved to intervene again, but an assistant artist stepped in, insisting they be allowed to finish their conversation in peace. Hannah seemed torn, glancing back at the two children playing, unaware of the adult drama unfolding. Michael followed her gaze, seeing a little girl who resembled Hannah with delicate features and a curious expression, and a boy who, in his features, mirrored Michael's own childhood. "Are they my children?" he whispered, his voice breaking. Hannah didn't answer immediately. Her teary eyes spoke volumes. Michael stepped closer, but she raised a hand to stop him. "Not now. You can't just show up and—" and act like everything is fine." Each word dripped with pain. Michael felt guilt gnawing at him. He remembered how much time he had neglected her, consumed by work. Swallowing hard, he recalled the hardships she must have endured, her shame, her fear, her struggle without support. Now, here she was with 2 children who likely had never met their father. "I'm sorry. I know I made mistakes," he whispered, careful not to draw more attention. "But I'm trying to change. I understand if you don't want to hear me out, but—" Suddenly, a shout echoed from outside. Someone yelled about armed men attempting to breach the warehouse. Chaos erupted as Michael recognized faces from a previous protest, henchmen of an investor determined to tarnish Michael's reputation. They were breaking in, vowing to shut down the event. Most artists were confused, trying to protect themselves and salvage their work. Tension escalated in an instant. Hannah looked fearfully at the children who were on the verge of tears. Michael, without hesitation, ran outside to confront the invaders, unsure if he could handle the situation but intent on buying time for Hannah and the children to find safety. Outside the warehouse, chaos reigned. The intruders acted with hostility, overturning easels and scattering paint boxes to disrupt the festival. Michael tried to reason with them, urging them not to escalate the violence, but his words fell on deaf ears. One of them shoved him, and he nearly toppled onto a craft display. Artists panicked, some calling the police, but it was unclear how long help would take to arrive. Then, Michael saw Hannah standing at the entrance, holding one of the children by the hand. She watched him defend the festival with a bewildered expression, seemingly unsure why he would risk himself for an event tied to a mysterious sponsor. The suited man beside her barked at her to retreat, but she hesitated, visibly restless. One of the henchmen lunged at a young woman gathering paintbrushes from the ground, yelling for her to move aside. Michael stepped between them, taking a glancing blow to his arm. Pain shot through him, but he managed to shield the young woman. Blood stained his shirt, but he stood firm. At last, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, prompting the intruders to flee. The aftermath was devastating. Shattered paintings, scattered objects, and artists in tears. With the police now present, order slowly returned. Statements were taken as the crowd began to reorganize. Michael, clutching his injured arm and smeared with paint, leaned against a toppled easel, his heart pounding. When he looked up, he saw Hannah approaching, one child clinging to her leg and the other clutching a colorful scarf she carried in her bag. "You're hurt," she said, her voice taut with concern. Michael tried to smile but was weakened by the pain in his arm and the intensity of the moment. "I'm fine. I just didn't want anyone to get hurt. Not you. Not anyone here." Hannah's eyes betrayed a storm of emotions. She glanced around, ensuring her children were safe, before returning her gaze to him. A heavy silence hung between them. Why did you go to such lengths to find me?" she asked softly, keeping her voice low so the children wouldn't overhear. "After all this time?" Michael shrugged, his eyes falling on the small hands clutching Hannah's dress. The sight tore at his heart. "Because I realized I couldn't live without you, without all of you. And because I know I made mistakes, but I want to try to make things right." She took a deep breath, holding back tears. She wasn't sure how much she could trust his words, haunted by memories of sleepless nights filled with frustration and abandonment. Placing a hand on her face, she seemed to search for clarity within herself. Meanwhile, the 2 children gazed at Michael curiously, oblivious to the adult turmoil. One of them asked quietly, "Mommy, who is he?" The question hit Michael like a punch to the gut. His child was asking who he was. His voice faltered and he barely held back tears. Still, he forced the kindest smile he could muster, trying to convey that he meant no harm. "He's just a friend who wanted to make sure you're all okay," Hannah replied uncertainly, unable to summon the courage to reveal the truth. She turned back to Michael, her eyes reflecting a mix of resentment and uncertainty. Something still connected them, but the wounds of the past remained raw. I need time to think," she murmured, stepping back toward her children. Michael didn't try to stop her. He understood that she needed space. Everything was too overwhelming. An interrupted festival, violent intruders, a reunion between estranged lovers separated by years. Around them, people were beginning to tidy up, and the police continued to gather statements. As Hannah prepared to leave, she leaned in close and whispered one final sentence. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Michael felt the world collapsing when Hannah, looking at him with a mixture of anger and insecurity, turned around and pulled the children away from him. There was no goodbye, only a cutting silence and the frightened looks of the little ones. He tried to call her name, but his voice was too weak to reach her. She was already walking away, the children clutching her skirt, leaving behind the smell of paint, overturned canvases, and the chaos caused by the henchmen who had attacked the cultural event. Within minutes, she disappeared from his sight, vanishing down the corridors of the warehouse. He stood there motionless, bearing the marks of the confrontation on his body. His shirt, stained with paint and dried blood, contrasted with the emptiness he felt inside. It was the second time he had watched Hannah leave, this time dragging two children who were also his by right. He tried to follow her, but stumbled upon artists gathering shards of broken sculptures, sirens wailing, and police officers asking for statements. It seemed impossible to navigate through the chaos to reach her before she escaped again. With a heavy heart, he walked slowly to the exit. Outside, the evening painted shades of orange and purple across the sky. But to him, everything seemed gray. A few neighborhood residents still watched the police cars, and the remaining witnesses gave agitated accounts of what they had seen. In a way, no one there understood Michael's pain. To them, he was just another man in a suit caught up in a mess. Reaching his car, he noticed a flood of messages on his phone. Most were from company advisors, informing him that the situation was deteriorating. There was an internal move to permanently remove him from his position, and some newspapers were already accusing him of causing shareholder losses due to his personal obsession. Michael tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, unable to respond to anyone at that moment. He needed a moment of silence to think about Hannah and the children he had just seen up close. He started the car but didn't head straight home. Instead, he roamed the streets aimlessly, trying to calm his mind. The images of Hannah, her hardened expression, haunted him. She had literally pushed him out of her life without even giving him space to explain. He felt he had tried to protect the event, but perhaps, in Hannah's eyes, it wasn't enough to overcome everything she had endured during the years of his absence. He thought about the way the children looked at him, with surprise, perhaps a bit of fear, as if silently asking who he was. It hurt, like a splinter lodged in his chest. After wandering through deserted streets, passing by neon signs of bars and pharmacies without noticing the time, he found himself in front of the company building. There, large glass doors and neon lights reflected the opulence of a place that had once been his empire, but now threatened to swallow him whole. He wondered if it was even worth going inside. Deciding it was, he resolved to collect some belongings and try to understand how far his rivals on the board had advanced their attack. In the lobby, he received suspicious glances from the night guards, who had undoubtedly read about the recent events. Perhaps everyone there was wondering if the once powerful CEO was about to lose his grip completely. Michael took the elevator up, feeling a hollow pit in his stomach. Reaching the floor that had been his, officially it still was, though he doubted it with every passing minute, he noticed a shift in atmosphere. The lights were partially dimmed, and the corridor seemed deserted, save for a guard on patrol. Entering his former office, he observed shelves filled with trophies and corporate awards that once fed his ego. Now, they felt meaningless. He sat in the chair, staring at the desk cluttered with untouched reports. He recalled Hannah complaining years ago that there was never room for her drawings in that space. He had dismissed such comments, considering them trivial. Now he realized too late it was proof that nothing he had built mattered without her. After several minutes staring into the void, his phone buzzed. The caller ID displayed the name of the most hostile board member, the impeccably dressed investor leading the charge against him. Michael answered with a heavy sigh, already bracing for the worst. "Gray, I'm calling to inform you that the vote to permanently remove you has begun," said the cold voice on the other end. "But perhaps we can reach an amicable agreement. Abandon this insane pursuit of your ex-wife and halt the expenses on the shelters. Maybe we can salvage part of your reputation." Michael rubbed the back of his neck, feeling anger simmer. If he had previously doubted whether it was worth fighting, he now realized that giving up meant turning his back on everything Hannah valued and ignoring the rights of the women housed in the shelters. He thought of Hannah and the 2 children, imagining them needing a place to stay and finding the doors closed. "I won't negotiate anything that involves shutting down the shelters," he said, his voice firm but weary. "And yes, I'm looking for Hannah. If that bothers you, too bad." The investor let out a dry laugh. "You're signing your death sentence, Gray. There will be no mercy at the next meeting. The board will oust you completely." The call ended. Michael dropped the phone onto the desk, swallowing hard. He wanted to scream, to break something, but held back. It felt as though every escape route was blocked. Hannah's image appeared vividly in his mind, in that warehouse corridor, saying she didn't know if she could trust him again. How could he convince her he had changed when, for all intents and purposes, he remained entangled in the shadows of corporate power? He needed to take a drastic step to prove that nothing mattered more than his family. He attempted to send a message to Hannah on WhatsApp, but her number was no longer active. He called with no answer. He sent emails to the address she once used. All went unanswered. Finally, he contacted Jonas, who picked up immediately, concerned by Michael's strained tone. His friend confirmed that he had tried to pass a message to Hannah but was blocked by someone who seemed intent on keeping her out of reach. Perhaps it was a mysterious sponsor or people fearing that Michael might exploit the children for self-promotion. That thought cut deep. He would never stoop so low, but he understood that Hannah and the children had their reasons to doubt him. After ending the call with Jonas, Michael buried his face in his hands. He was lost, with no control over his own life. He had an empire slipping through his fingers and a family that didn't trust him enough to hear him out. He remembered the children's curious, shining eyes, silently asking who he was. Had Hannah told them he was dead? Or perhaps an emotionless man? Maybe they had grown up hearing distorted stories. He needed to set the record straight. The next morning, as the sun rose, more bad news flooded in. Newspapers reported his imminent dismissal. Some articles even hinted at possible lawsuits from shareholders. The company's name was tied to scandals, and the stock value was plummeting. The shelter's future hinged on upcoming meetings, but without voting power, Michael was powerless. He felt like a ghost, wandering through a place that was, with each passing moment, less his. As he brooded in his former office, he recalled a letter Hannah had once written, expressing her fears of raising their children in a toxic environment filled with arguments and corporate pressures. At that moment, he realized that as long as he remained at the helm of the company, she would never believe he had let go of his selfish mindset. He needed to prove, in the most radical way, that his priorities had changed. After much deliberation, he picked up the phone, took a deep breath, and called Jonas. His friend answered, anxious. "Jonas, do me a favor," Michael said, his voice hoarse with anguish. "Prepare my resignation letter. I've decided I can't carry this burden while searching for Hannah. If I stay, everything will be used against me, and the foundation will remain at risk. I have something more important to do." Jonas tried to argue, suggesting legal avenues, but Michael wouldn't listen. He felt that by resigning, he would finally be free to fight for Hannah, to ensure the children saw his true self. and as much as it hurt to relinquish the position he had built, nothing mattered more than regaining her trust and safeguarding the shelters. Somehow, he would find allies outside the board or use his personal connections to sustain the causes he cared about. But in that moment, the presidency was irrelevant. He needed to break free of its chains. Sighing, he confirmed his decision to Jonas once more, even as his friend pleaded for caution. There was no turning back. All that remained was to formalize the paperwork and inform the board that, if they wanted his fall, they would get it, but not with his head bowed. He would do it in a way that kept the shelters alive, as his final act of honor. He hung up and sat in silence, staring at the framed achievements on the wall, remnants of past glories. And he thought, if Hannah knew, would she understand how much he was willing to sacrifice to have a chance to be a father, to be a partner worthy of her? He closed his eyes, trying not to break down in tears. The whirlwind of emotions and memories crashed over him like relentless waves. Perhaps there was still a way to show he had changed. He hoped, with all his heart, that she wouldn't disappear forever. Michael picked up the phone and called Jonas again, saying, "Prepare my resignation letter. I have something more important to do." Michael spent the sleepless night after formalizing his decision to resign as CEO. He wasn't sure if he would feel relief or an even greater void. For many years, that presidency had been everything to him, until he realized that in the end, it meant nothing without Hannah and the children. At dawn, he called Jonas to ask if the paperwork was ready. His friend confirmed, still surprised by Michael's resolute decision to walk away from the entire structure he had built. He left the apartment with a serious demeanor. A cold wind swept through the deserted street, and Michael took it as a sign that everything would change from that moment on. On his way to the company building, a pang of melancholy struck him. He remembered how, once, he had arrived there euphoric to celebrate the first major contract he had signed. Back then, Hannah had been by his side, smiling, cheering for every achievement. Today, the scene was entirely different. When he arrived, security guards and employees watched him with curiosity. Many had already heard through whispers in the hallways and the headlines that Michael Gray was stepping down. The atmosphere was tense and stifling. He crossed the lobby without greeting anyone, heading straight to the elevator up to the executive floor. At the top, he found Jonas holding a folder of documents. "It's all here," Jonas said, extending the materials. "You'll need to sign them. After that, we'll file them with the board and the directors." Michael took the envelope and, without saying a word, skimmed through the pages. They were forms to officially submit his resignation, transferring the CEO role to an interim appointee chosen by the board until a new president was named. He held the pen and, without hesitation, signed in all the necessary fields. A strange weight pressed on his chest, as if the pen were a scalpel severing his ties with the company. "Are you sure about this?" Jonas asked, his voice low and hesitant. "Once you sign, there's no turning back." "I know, Jonas, but it's what I need to do. I can't stay here while so many injustices go unchecked, and I have to find a way to support the shelters without further tarnishing their reputation." He handed the signed pages back to his friend, who nodded, visibly concerned but respecting his decision. Jonas left to file the resignation, leaving Michael alone in his former office. The room still held memories of high-level meetings, celebratory toasts, and, paradoxically, moments when Hannah would call, begging for his attention. He approached the trophy shelf and leafed through an album of old photos. There he was, posing with executives, flashing a victorious smile that no longer meant anything. Minutes later, a member of the board entered, a man in an impeccable suit who had always opposed the social projects. His face bore a subtle expression of triumph, though he maintained a facade of cordiality. "So, Gray, I see you've finally made the sensible decision. The company appreciates the opportunity to move forward without your, let's say, inconvenient reputation." Michael didn't respond immediately. His gaze turned to the window, looking out over the city. He wanted to say something about the shelters, but the board member preempted him. "Don't worry. We'll take a more objective look at which philanthropy programs to maintain. Not all of them will be cut, but of course there will be substantial adjustments." He offered a slight smirk, and Michael understood it meant most of the projects would die. His blood boiled, but he reminded himself of his promise not to engage in conflicts. The resignation would give him the freedom to act on his own. "You don't need to be here any longer, Gray," the board member concluded, shaking hands coldly. "Best of luck with your personal matters." After he left, Michael took a deep breath and walked through the office one last time. He gathered a few personal items, photos, and sentimental notes left in the drawers. Seeing a colorful notepad reminded him of Hannah, who used to sketch painting ideas on it. He collected anything remotely meaningful. Closing the door behind him, he didn't look back. 2 floors down, he found Jonas waiting by the reception desk. His friend was holding the official protocol confirming the voluntary resignation. "Here it is," Jonas said, handing it to Michael. "You no longer have any formal ties to the presidency." Michael tucked the paper into his folder and offered a weak smile of gratitude. He wanted to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. Then a financial department intern rushed over with news that the press was already outside, waiting for an official statement. They likely wanted to film the dramatic exit of the former CEO. "I won't feed into their spectacle," Michael decided. "Tell them there won't be a press conference." He exited through the garage, avoiding reporters. His legs felt shaky, as if he might collapse at any moment. Each step he took, he absorbed his surroundings for the last time. This routine was no longer his. Outside, he got into his car and, before turning the key, said a silent prayer, asking for strength to face what lay ahead. He drove to a quiet cafe where he often met with activists and shelter volunteers. He needed to ensure the network of support for women would continue functioning. With his resignation, he no longer had the legal authority to allocate funds, but could use his personal connections and influence to seek external donations, partnerships with NGOs, and independent philanthropic organizations. Upon arriving, he was greeted by 2 shelter coordinators, both looking concerned. "Michael, is it true you've left the company for good?" one of them asked, gripping his hand firmly. "What about the projects you promised to maintain?" He sighed, feeling the weight of disappointment in their eyes. He needed to provide an answer that wasn't entirely disheartening. "It's true, I've resigned, but that doesn't mean I've abandoned you. If I stayed in there, nothing would change. Now I can look for other paths, other sponsors, and convince people who still believe in our cause. We need time. Don't stop working in the shelters." He explained that they would organize donation drives and seek direct agreements with small businesses interested in social projects. The coordinators exchanged glances, slightly more hopeful. Though it was a long shot, they knew Michael had always been sincere about protecting the women and children in the shelters. After over an hour of discussion, they aligned on some ideas. He left the cafe, walking down a tree-lined street, trying to breathe in the fresh air and dispel the negative thoughts. Passing a newsstand, he saw his photo on the cover of a magazine with bold letters. "Michael Gray resigns, scandals and family obsession topple the empire." He felt nauseated but kept walking. There were more urgent matters to address, and one of them was Hannah. Michael began reaching out to anyone who might have leads on her whereabouts. Rumors swirled that after the festival incident, Hannah had moved to temporary accommodations, possibly funded by a mysterious benefactor. Michael even spoke to a volunteer at the United Hands shelter, where Hannah had left a letter in the past. Nothing. No one had seen her in recent days. To make matters worse, a vindictive investor was intensifying a smear campaign against Michael, revealing old secrets. Accusations surfaced that he had engaged in questionable transactions to boost the company in its early days. While some of it was true, driven by his ambition, everything now exploded as if his entire history was being twisted to portray him in the darkest light. It terrified him, but it also steeled his resolve to clear his name honestly. In the days that followed, Michael's challenges multiplied. His bank accounts were frozen as part of an investigation into alleged embezzlement, something he knew was the result of internal machinations by the board. With limited resources, he paid lawyers to fight back, though each hearing seemed like another step up an insurmountable mountain. Despite this, he persisted in reaching out to associations and NGOs to keep the shelters running. His tenacity yielded small donations, modest but enough to temporarily stave off closures. Time was running out, and Hannah remained untraceable. Jonas, worried about Michael's mental health, began monitoring social media and art blogs, searching for any mention of Hannah Evans or women matching her description. He knew she had applied for a scholarship, but no public updates had surfaced. It was as if Hannah had intentionally vanished, perhaps to avoid more scandals or simply to protect the children. One afternoon, Jonas appeared at the small makeshift office Michael had set up in his apartment. He carried a worn manila envelope with the Gray Foundation's logo printed in the corner. He handed it to Michael, who opened it warily. Inside was a note, unsigned, and several photos of Hannah and the children. The message read, "Leave her alone. She doesn't need you. If you persist, you'll lose much more than the presidency." Michael furrowed his brow and looked at Jonas, who shook his head, deeply concerned. Someone was trying to intimidate him, likely to keep him away from Hannah. Was it the same investor or an ally? He placed the envelope on the table, his lips tight with anger and worry. Who stood to gain from keeping Hannah so far from him in such an aggressive way? In the following days, while trying to decipher clues, Michael received a call from an unidentified woman who informed him that Hannah was a finalist for the scholarship, with the decision due soon. If she's approved, she'll leave the country with the children before the end of the month. That's her wish. And the kids support the idea since they have no connection to you. Hearing that last sentence, Michael felt a lump in his throat. The children had no connection to him. They were part of a reality he had never known. If Hannah was fostering the belief that he was absent or dangerous, it meant those boys and girls would grow up believing he didn't care. He needed to stop her from leaving, if only to explain himself and apologize. Summoning the courage to do what he never thought he'd do, Michael decided to call a press conference to share the truth about his past, live on national television. He wanted to shed the image of a cold and calculating man, to explain why he had funded so many shelters and how it all tied back to Hannah's story. But the press conference was a week away, and by then, it might be too late. Hannah could receive the scholarship results before that. As he prepared his speech, Michael made one last attempt to locate her. No one knew her whereabouts. A volunteer, requesting anonymity, confessed that Hannah often spoke of wanting to start a new life in another country, free from judgment and painful memories. Yet Michael suspected that, deep down, Hannah held on to a glimmer of hope. Why, then, were so many people working tirelessly to keep him away? One quiet evening, sitting amidst piles of papers and donation receipts, Michael received the final blow. Jonas's assistant called, distressed, and revealed that during her inquiries with volunteers and acquaintances of Hannah, she had uncovered something devastating. Hannah had been honest with the children about their father's absence. She had told them how he had been consumed by his own ego, never asking about the pregnancy or whether they needed support. "She told the kids you never looked for them, Michael," the assistant said, her voice cautious, as if afraid of hurting him further. "Apparently, to them, you're the man who abandoned them, and there's no way to change that view." Michael felt as if he'd been punched in the chest. He let out a humorless laugh, a sad sound that didn't reach his eyes. After all, it wasn't a lie. He truly hadn't known, but he had also missed the signs, and later he hadn't tried to reconnect when Hannah left. The world seemed to spin in slow motion. The dream of reconciling with his children could shatter completely if they grew up convinced he was a coward who had abandoned them. He closed his eyes, dropping the phone carelessly onto the table. Neither the resignation nor the efforts to keep the shelters running None of it seemed capable of healing the wounds he himself had helped create. He needed to keep trying, but he couldn't ignore the truth. The years he spent consumed by ambition had exacted a price far too steep. Michael woke up that morning with his heart racing, unsure if it was anxiety or hope. He had spent the night wide awake, poring over papers and notes, double-checking every item he needed to bring to the Art Grant Award ceremony. This was where Hannah, under her new name, had reached the final stage of the competition, and everything pointed to her approval, which would mean she could leave the country within weeks. He couldn't let her disappear again without at least having an honest conversation. He left home earlier than usual. In the car's glove compartment, he carried envelopes containing documents that proved the legality of the funds allocated to the shelters, evidence that there were no irregularities or embezzlements. He also carried a small gift for Hannah, a professional painting kit he had bought, remembering how she had always dreamed of perfecting her craft abroad. That kit was a simple way of showing his support, but also a quiet apology for all the years he hadn't been by her side. The ceremony was held in a modest auditorium, far from major cultural centers. Outside, a sign announced, "Art Grants for Women in Vulnerable Situations, Final Edition." He took a deep breath before climbing the steps. People gathered at the entrance, some dressed casually, others carrying portfolios. Almost everyone glanced at Michael with curiosity, perhaps recognizing him from the news, which painted him as a man entangled in scandals and obsessed with finding his missing wife. As soon as he stepped into the lobby, a reporter approached him. She thrust a microphone in his face, a cameraman pointing his lens directly at him. "Mr. Gray, is it true that Hannah Evans, a candidate for this grant, is your missing wife?" the journalist asked. "Why do you keep trying to approach her despite so many controversies?" He swallowed hard, striving to remain calm. He had anticipated the press would swarm the event, looking for a scoop. But this day was about Hannah, not about his feud with the board or any business-related issues. "I'm here to support the artistic work of these women, including Hannah," he replied firmly but gently, "and to show that I haven't abandoned the social cause just because I'm no longer at the helm of a major corporation. Their future is what matters." The reporter pressed on with more questions, but Michael moved away, choosing a discreet corner of the auditorium. From the audience, he could see the stage, set up with a simple awards table where various candidates would be called to receive diplomas, trophies, or announcements of their grant approvals. His heart raced again as he imagined Hannah stepping onto the stage. Would she, upon seeing him, abandon everything and run away? Or would she grow angry at his interference in a moment that should be hers alone? Time seemed to crawl as he waited. People moved back and forth, checking registration lists and confirming documents. At one point, a man with a severe expression and a dark suit appeared through a side door. Michael recognized him immediately, one of the henchmen he had seen at a protest, and later at the festival where Hannah had displayed her paintings. It seemed the man was there to ensure that everything went according to the wishes of someone powerful, perhaps the investor who was determined to keep Hannah away from him. This put Michael on high alert. A few minutes later, an announcement came over the microphone calling the finalists to prepare backstage. Standing at the back of the auditorium, Michael bit the tip of his thumb, watching intently for any sign of Hannah. Then the lights dimmed slightly, and the ceremony began. The host gave a brief speech about the importance of supporting women who, in addition to talent, carried stories of resilience. Then, they began calling the finalists by either their artistic or real names. When Hannah Evans was announced, Michael saw her silhouette cross the stage, bathed in soft light. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her hair tied in a loose bun, and held a small painting of flowers, likely her latest work or something symbolic of her achievement. Her face displayed calm, but her eyes scanned the audience as if sensing his presence. He watched her, both captivated and anxious. She was finally there, close to him, at a pivotal moment in her life. Even from a distance, He could feel the tension in Hannah's shoulders, as though she were bracing for something to go wrong or for him to interfere. An elderly woman, likely a member of the evaluation committee, praised the technique and sensitivity in Hannah's painting. They spoke about how her work expressed rebirth and hope, and how this quiet artist had revealed a unique perspective. "It is with great pleasure that we announce Hannah Evans is approved and will receive our scholarship," the woman declared joyfully. The audience broke into applause, and Hannah seemed to exhale deeply, almost smiling, though her gaze still appeared to be searching for something or someone in the crowd. Michael was overcome with a mix of joy and despair. He was happy because he knew how much this dream meant to her, but he feared that with the confirmation of the grant, she would leave the country for good, taking the children and shattering any chance of reconciliation. As the ceremony neared its end, a voice suddenly interrupted from the back. It was the man in the dark suit who stepped forward and requested the microphone. He made a bizarre accusation, claiming that the grant had been awarded under questionable circumstances because Hannah had connections to Michael Gray, a supposed patron trying to manipulate the process. The audience murmured, and Hannah froze on stage, her face tightening with tension. Michael, standing in the back, realized this was another ploy by the investor trying to discredit him and prevent any chance of reunion. Without hesitation, he rushed forward, facing the crowd's stares, and climbed onto the stage. "That's a lie," he said, his voice loud through the microphone on the table. "If anyone here paid bribes or influenced the committee, it wasn't me. Hannah earned this scholarship on her own. In fact, I helped create this grant program, but I didn't even know she had applied until very recently." The audience fell silent, stunned. The man tried to argue that Michael had controlled the foundation's funds for years, but Michael met his gaze firmly. "I no longer have any authority over the foundation. I'm not the CEO, and I don't interfere in its operations. If Hannah won, it was purely on her merit." The event organizers, visibly perplexed, checked their documents and confirmed that the grant process had been entirely conducted by an independent committee, with no current ties to Michael. This was enough to discredit the man in the suit. He slinked away, but not before casting Michael a look of pure hatred, as if vowing revenge. Once the situation calmed down, Hannah remained on stage, still holding her painting. She seemed paralyzed by the whirlwind of emotions clashing within her. People began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. The host bid farewell, leaving the stage empty. Seeing that most people had left, Hannah turned to Michael, who remained by her side, his expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Thank you for clearing things up," she said, her voice slightly trembling. "But you didn't have to put yourself out there." "I did," he replied. "I had to make sure you weren't hurt because of me." He looked at her, taking in every feature of the woman who had once been his partner. "I've caused enough damage before. I don't want it to happen again." Hannah took a deep breath, torn between arguing and expressing gratitude. Then she noticed the children standing at the side of the auditorium, watching the scene. They had come to see their mother receive the award and seemed anxious, curious to understand what was happening. "You," Michael began, his voice faltering, "you must be so proud of your mom." The older girl, somewhat shy, clung to Hannah's hand. The boy eyed Michael suspiciously but didn't run away. Perhaps he was confused, unsure whether Michael was a threat or a protector. "Is this what you want, Michael?" Hannah asked, turning to him again. "To disrupt my chance to leave the country?" He shook his head, almost smiling with sadness. "I don't want to disrupt anything. I want you to have the chance to follow your dream, but—" He lowered his voice. "In a way that we can at least try to understand each other. Give me a chance to show I've changed, that I can be better, that I can be a real father." Hannah trembled slightly, looking at the children, then back at Michael, as if trying to measure the sincerity in his voice. She knew the trip abroad would be a definitive escape, but she also didn't want the children to grow up without knowing the regret he seemed to feel. Images of the past flooded her mind. Their wedding day, the promises, the small apartment adorned with colorful paintings, Michael's laughter when there was still time for small joys. It was painful, but real. She began hesitantly, I don't fully trust you, but I see that you're trying. And these children, they deserve at least to know who you really are. Michael felt a wave of relief mixed with fear. He knew rebuilding trust would take time. Then he pulled the painting kit from his pocket and offered it as a modest gift. This is for you. I know it doesn't make up for everything I've lost, but I wanted you to know I support your dreams. And wherever you go, I want to be there to help. Hannah took the kit, her hands trembling. As she opened it and saw the brushes, she couldn't hold back a tear that slid down her face. The children gathered around her, curious about the colorful item. She looked at Michael, her heart racing. Despite all the bitterness, there was something in him that moved her, a genuine desire to be part of their story. The exchange of glances lasted only a few seconds, but was intense. It seemed like a silent agreement to try, somehow, to rewrite what had been interrupted. In the background, a few onlookers still lingered, but none of them understood the weight of that reunion. The grant committee coordinator reappeared, calling Hannah to sign the acceptance forms. Looking at her children, she took a deep breath and took the first step. Michael followed her to the spot where the documents would be formalized. The children ran after them, eager to see the shiny paint on the brand-new brushes. "Do you officially accept the grant?" the coordinator asked. "Are you aware that you'll be traveling in a few months to begin the training courses?" Hannah hesitated, seeking Michael's eyes. He, in turn, waited without pressuring her, but he was terrified that this might be the last time he'd see her. The coordinator repeated the question, and then Hannah signed. She would not let her dreams slip away again. Before handing over the final sheet, however, she turned to Michael and whispered, "I'll only accept this if you're willing to be part of our lives," she said, including the children in her gaze. But this time sincerely, without illusions. A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise of immediate reconciliation, but it was an opportunity. Smiling with tears in his eyes, he simply nodded. He knew that this would be a difficult but real restart. Once the document was signed, the coordinator welcomed Hannah as the new art grant recipient, and the small remaining audience clapped softly, perhaps not fully grasping the scene but happy for her. The man in the dark suit had disappeared, and there were no signs of further disruptions. Michael knelt to look the children in the eyes. "My name is Michael, and I want you to know that your father should never have been away. I promise to make up for every lost minute." The children didn't respond immediately. They were still shy, but the boy's expression softened, and the girl watched her father with curiosity. Hannah approached, her hair escaping the bun, and placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, as if recognizing that a step needed to be taken. "Maybe we can't erase the past, but we can start over, together." If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.